At some point today, you will walk past someone who is going to die. You don't know who. They don't know either. Maybe it's the person in the coffee shop. Maybe it's someone you love. Maybe, and this is the one we don't like to think about, maybe it's you. Every single human being who has ever lived has known this, has felt it, has lain awake at some point in the dark and thought, what happens after? Not as a theological exercise, not as a philosophical puzzle, as a terror. And what did every civilization in the history of this planet do with that terror? They answered it. Not with silence, not with "we don't know," with stories, with maps, with extraordinary, detailed, specific visions of what waits on the other side of the last breath. The ancient Egyptians mapped the afterlife so precisely, they wrote instruction manuals for navigating it. The Greeks built an entire geography of the dead rivers, judges, fields, palaces, and argued about its layout for centuries. The Norse described a world of the dead so cold and vast that even the gods feared it. The Mesopotamians believed the dead ate dust and clay, and that this was simply the price of having lived. The Aztecs said the road you took after death depended not on how well you lived, but on how you died. The Japanese described a river that the dead must cross alone, watched by an old woman who strips them of everything they brought with them. And the Celts said that the dead don't go down, they go west. Today, we go through every major ancient mythology, every underworld, every paradise, every road between them. And at the end, we ask what all of these maps have in common, and what that might tell us about the one journey none of us can prepare for by reading someone else's account. Let's go. No civilization in history spent more time, more wealth, more architectural genius, or more intellectual energy on the afterlife than ancient Egypt. For 3,000 years, longer than the entire span of recorded Western history, the Egyptians built, wrote, painted, and engineered with a single obsession: surviving death. And their afterlife was not vague. It was not a better place. It was a bureaucracy, a landscape, a journey with specific obstacles, specific helpers, and specific ways to fail. Let's walk through it. The moment of death. When an Egyptian died, their soul split. The ancient Egyptians believed humans had multiple spiritual components, not one soul, but several. The two most important were the Ka and the Ba. The Ka was the life force, the vital energy that animated a person. It remained connected to the body after death, which is why the body had to be preserved through mummification. If the body decayed completely, the Ka had nowhere to return to. The Ba was closer to what we'd call the personality, the individual essence of a person. It was depicted as a human-headed bird. After death, the Ba could leave the tomb, fly around the world of the living, and return. But it had to find the body each night. Another reason mummification mattered. There was also the Ak, the transformed, glorified spirit that resulted when the Ka and Ba successfully reunited in the afterlife. Becoming an Ak was the goal. It was what you were working toward. The journey, the dead person's Ba descended into the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a complex, dangerous realm of corridors, gates, and guardians. To pass through, you needed to know the correct spells, the correct words, the correct names of the guardians at each gate. This is why the Book of the Dead existed, not a book of theology, but a practical guide, a collection of spells, passwords, and instructions for navigating the Duat. Wealthy Egyptians commissioned personalized copies with their own name inserted. It was the ancient world's most important travel document, the Hall of Two Truths. After navigating the Duat, the dead person arrived here, the most famous scene in Egyptian afterlife belief. The dead stood before 42 divine judges and made the negative confession, a declaration of innocence across 42 categories of sin. I have not stolen. I have not killed. I have not spoken lies. I have not coveted. I have not caused suffering. 42 denials, one for each judge, each one overseen by a specific god. And then the centerpiece of the entire system, the weighing of the heart. The deceased's heart, believed to contain the record of every action, every thought, every secret, was placed on one side of a great golden scale. On the other side, a single white feather, the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, a life of truth and righteousness, the soul was declared true of voice and passed through. If the heart was heavier, weighed down by sin, by deceit, by cruelty, it was immediately devoured by Ammit, the devourer. A chimera of crocodile, lion, and hippopotamus who waited beside the scale. A heart consumed by Ammit meant the second death, not punishment, but annihilation, complete cessation. No afterlife at all. The field of reeds. Those who passed entered Aru, the field of reeds, a paradise that looked exactly like Egypt, the same flat land, the same Nile, the same fields of wheat, but perfect, eternal harvest. No drought, no flood, no tax collector. The dead would farm, sail, feast, and live in complete contentment forever. But there was a catch. Even in paradise, there was labor. The gods might call on the dead to perform work in the afterlife. This is why wealthy Egyptians were buried with small figurines called Ushabti, servant figures, who would answer in your place if you were called to work. Even in eternity, the Egyptians found a way to outsource the difficult tasks. We've covered this before on this channel, but today we go deeper, because the Greek afterlife is not one place, it is a world. With its own geography, its own rivers, its own politics, its own neighborhoods. The journey begins at the river. When a Greek died, their shade, their psyche, descended to the banks of the river Styx. Or sometimes the river Charon. Ancient sources debate which river you crossed first, and the answer seems to be both, at different points. Waiting at the bank was Charon the ferryman, old, ragged, perpetually irritable. His job, transport the dead to the other side. His fee, 1 coin, an obol, a small Greek coin. This is why the Greeks buried their dead with a coin placed in the mouth or on the eyes. Without payment, Charon would not take you. And without Charon, you waited on the bank for 100 years, according to some sources as a homeless, untethered shade. The Greeks took this seriously enough that the coin for Charon was one of the most consistent burial practices across the entire Greek world for over 1,000 years. The rivers of the Underworld. The Greek underworld had 5 rivers, each with a specific function. Styx, the river of hatred, unbreakable. The gods themselves swore their most sacred oaths by the Styx. An oath broken would mean losing divine status for 9 years. Acheron, the river of woe, the primary crossing point. Lethe, the river of forgetting. Souls about to be reincarnated drank from the Lethe to forget their previous lives. Those who chose to remain in Elysium drank from the Mnemosyne, the river of memory, to retain everything. Phlegethon, the river of fire, flowing down to Tartarus. Cocytus, the river of lamentation, made from the tears of the dead. The 3 judges. Every soul was assessed by 3 former kings, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These were men of legendary justice during their lives. Now they sorted the dead with complete impartiality. And here's a detail almost nobody knows. The judgment was conducted with the souls naked and blind, without their bodies, without the advantages or disadvantages of their appearance, wealth, or social position, without even knowing who was judging them. The Greeks understood something profound. True justice requires removing every advantage except the one that should matter what kind of person you actually were. The 3 destinations. The asphodel meadows for ordinary souls, neither rewarded nor punished, gray, purposeless, a twilight existence of diminished consciousness. The Homeric heroes in the Odyssey are found here, even the great Achilles, who tells Odysseus that he would rather be the lowest living slave than king of all the dead. Elysium for the favored and heroic, beautiful, joyful, radiant. Some versions describe souls here eventually choosing to be reborn, cycling through 3 virtuous lives until they earn a permanent place in the Isles of the Blessed, the innermost paradise where the greatest of the great reside in eternal joy. Tartarus for the cosmically guilty. We've covered this before. Sisyphus, Tantalus, Ixion, and the Titans. Punishments calibrated with poetic precision to the nature of the crime. What makes the Greek afterlife unique? Its fundamental democracy and its fundamental inequity, right beside each other. Everyone goes there. The greatest warrior and the most forgotten peasant arrive at the same bank and face the same ferry. Death is the great leveler. But once inside, status, heroism, and divine favor reassert themselves. The afterlife mirrors the living world and its hierarchies, just stripped of pretense. The Greeks were not idealists. Their afterlife proves it. Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, Babylon, and Akkad gives us the oldest written afterlife narratives in human history. And they are bleak, profoundly, almost defiantly bleak. The Mesopotamian underworld was called Kur in Sumerian, also translated as the Great Below or Irkalla in Babylonian, named after its queen. And it was not a place of punishment or reward. It was a place of sameness. Every person who died went there, kings and slaves, heroes and cowards, the righteous and the cruel. They all arrived at the same destination, which the texts describe consistently as a house of dust and darkness, a place where the dead wear garments of feathers, where they sit in darkness, where they eat dust and clay. There is no weighing of hearts, no river of forgetting, no paradise for the deserving. There is just the great below, the gates. To enter, a soul passed through 7 gates. At each gate, a piece of their earthly identity was removed. Their crown, their garments, their jewelry. By the time they arrived in the throne room of Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, they had nothing. They were nobody. They were simply dead. This stripping is described in one of the oldest stories ever written, The Descent of Inanna, in which the goddess of love and war descends to the underworld for reasons that the poem leaves tantalizingly ambiguous. At each gate, she is forced to surrender something: crown, lapis lazuli, necklace, breastplate, gold ring, measuring rod. Finally, she stands naked and powerless before Ereshkigal, who kills her with a look. She is eventually rescued through divine intervention and the sacrifice of a substitute. The descent and return of a great figure is one of the oldest story structures in human literature, and Inanna may be its first occurrence. The exception. The Mesopotamians did have one concept of a better afterlife available to a very small number of people. If you were buried properly, if your family performed the correct rites, if they fed your ghost the atemu with offerings of food and water, then you rested somewhat more comfortably. If you were not buried, if your body was left on a battlefield or lost at sea, if your family had died and there was no one to make offerings, then your atemu wandered hungry, angry, potentially dangerous to the living. The Mesopotamian afterlife was not about what you deserved. It was about whether you were remembered. A civilization that built its cities on rivers that flooded and receded, that watched kingdoms rise and collapse in generations, that lived under the shadow of forces completely beyond human control. Perhaps it makes sense that their afterlife offered not justice, but something simpler. Don't be forgotten. That's the most you can ask for. The Norse afterlife is not one place. It is at least 4, and possibly 9, arranged across the branches and roots of the world tree Yggdrasil. Which one you went to had nothing to do with whether you were a good person. It depended entirely on how you died. Valhalla. This is the famous one. Odin's great hall, Valhall, the Hall of the Slain. It had 540 doors, each wide enough for 800 warriors to march through abreast. Its roof was made of golden shields, The rafters were spears. Valhalla was reserved for warriors who died in battle specifically, warriors chosen by the Valkyries, Odin's warrior women who rode across battlefields, selecting the dead. Not every warrior who died in battle went to Valhalla. The Valkyries chose. It was an honor bestowed, not a destination earned. In Valhalla, the Einherjar, the chosen warriors, spent every day in battle. They fought, killed each other, were resurrected, feasted at night on endless boar, meat, and mead, and did it all again the next morning. This was not a vacation, this was training. They were being prepared for Ragnarok, the final battle for which Odin was building his army. Valhalla was a military barracks run by the god of death. The Norse did not romanticize it. They thought it was exactly right. Folkvang. Less famous but equally important, the field realm of Freya, goddess of love, magic, and war. Half of all warriors who died in battle went here. Freya had first choice, actually before Odin. Folkvanger is described more peacefully than Valhalla meadows rather than halls, rest rather than endless combat. The Norse afterlife already had two warrior paradises, and they were opposites in atmosphere. Hel. Everyone who did not die in battle, which was the vast majority of humanity, went to Hel, named after its ruler, a goddess who was also called Hel, daughter of Loki. She was described as half-living flesh and half-corpse blue-gray, and rotting on one side, normal skin on the other. Not evil, not cruel, simply the administrator of the inevitable. Hel's realm was called Niflheim. In its deeper reaches, the primordial realm of cold and mist and darkness that predated the creation of the world. The dead here were neither punished nor rewarded. They simply existed, diminished, gray. The worst part of Hel was not the cold or the darkness. It was the name of Hel's great hall, Eljuthnir, its doorstep, stumbling block, its knife, famine, its bed, sickbed, its bed curtains, glimmering misfortune. The Norse named the furniture of the afterlife. That detail alone tells you everything about the tone. Nastrond, the shore of corpses. Deep within Hel, a specific location for specific criminals. Murderers, oath-breakers, adulterers, those who violated the Norse values of loyalty and honor. Here, a great hall faced north, the unlucky direction, with doors facing inward. A serpent coiled over it, dripping venom through the roof. The wicked waded through rivers of venom. The Norse had a hell inside their hell. What the Norse afterlife tells us. Of all the traditions we've covered, the Norse are the most honest about something that most other cultures try to soften. Most people do not die heroically. Most people die quietly, of age or illness, in their beds. And for them, the Norse said, there is no paradise. There is only the cold, the gray, the endless diminishment. The Norse were not trying to comfort you. They were trying to make you live in a way that, when death came, it came in a moment worth choosing. Japanese mythology gives us one of the most quietly devastating afterlife images in human history. When a person died in ancient Japanese belief, their soul descended to Yomi, the underworld, literally the land of the dead, or the dark world. Like Mesopotamia's Kur, Yomi is not a place of punishment or paradise. It is simply the place where the dead go. The Kojiki, Japan's oldest chronicle, describes Yomi as a dark land of corruption and decay, from which there is no return. The creator god Izanagi descended there to retrieve his wife, Izanami, and what he found broke something in the world forever. She had eaten the food of the dead. She had begun to decay. He saw her in the darkness and fled. She sent demons to chase him. He sealed the entrance to Yomi with a great boulder. She called from behind the stone, "If you do this, I will kill 1,000 people of your land every day." He answered, "Then I will cause 1,500 to be born, death and birth, locked in permanent negotiation, separated by a stone." The Sanzu River. In Buddhist-influenced Japanese tradition, The dead must cross the Sanzu-no-kawa, the river of three crossings. Depending on the weight of your sins in life, you cross at different points. The lightest sinners cross at a shallow ford. The moderately sinned cross at a bridge. The heavily sinned must wade through deep water, crawling with serpents and demons. On the far bank waits Tatsueba, an old woman of terrifying aspect. She strips the dead of their clothing. If they arrive naked, if they have already been stripped of everything, she tears off their skin instead. She weighs the clothes on a branch. The heavier the sins, the heavier the garments. Her husband Kaneo hangs the clothes on the branch. The branch bends according to the weight of the life. No speech, no defense, no appeal. Just the weight of what you carried. And then, beyond the old woman, the soul is received by Emma O, the king of the dead, who consults two mirrors that replay every moment of the dead person's life. Every hidden act, every secret kindness, every cruelty no living witness saw. The mirrors show everything. The Aztec afterlife is perhaps the most surprising in this entire video because it completely inverts what most people assume about moral cosmology. In most traditions, the afterlife you receive reflects the life you lived. Good behavior leads to paradise. Evil leads to punishment. The Aztecs said, "That's not how it works." Where you went after death was determined almost entirely by the manner of your death, not your moral character. The 9 levels of Mictlan. Most people, those who died ordinary deaths of illness or old age, descended to Mictlan, the underworld. Not a punishment, simply the default destination. But Mictlan was not easy to reach. It required a 4-year journey through 9 levels of challenge. You had to cross a vast body of water, helped by a dog that was buried with you, which is why the Aztecs buried the dead with dogs. You had to pass through icy winds, through a field of obsidian wind that cut like knives, through 8 deserts and 8 hills. You had to pass between mountains that crashed together. At each stage, offerings made by the living helped you pass. The correct paper banners, the correct food, the correct ceremonies, performed correctly by people who remembered you. Again, the Aztecs, like the Mesopotamians, the dead depend on the memory of the living. After 4 years, the soul finally arrived before Mictlantecutli, the Lord of the Dead, a skeletal figure decorated with eyeballs and dissolved into the 9th level. Not paradise, not punishment, simply the end of the journey. The better destinations, dying in battle, dying as a sacrifice, or dying in childbirth, the Aztecs equated these 3. Warriors who died fighting, victims of sacrifice, and women who died in labor all went to Tonatiuh-Hichan, the house of the Sunday. They accompanied the sun on its daily journey. After 4 years, they became hummingbirds and butterflies, returning to the world of the living in the most beautiful forms. Those who drowned, were struck by lightning, or died from water-related diseases went to Tlalocan, the paradise of the rain god Tlaloc, lush, abundant, eternally green. Children who died very young went to a special paradise called Chichihuacuauco, where they were nursed by a great tree that dripped milk from its branches and waited to be reborn in a future world. What the Aztec afterlife says, every death is meaningful. Every manner of dying is watched, recorded, and rewarded, or simply processed by a cosmos that is attentive to how, not just whether. The Aztec warrior who died in battle wasn't going to paradise because he was virtuous. He was going because his death fed the cosmic machine. He died in the right role, at the right time, in service of the right purpose. The most important question in the Aztec universe was not, were you good? It was, were you useful to the continuation of existence? A deeply uncomfortable idea, and perhaps not entirely wrong. The Celtic afterlife breaks almost every pattern we've established in this video. It doesn't go down. It doesn't go through trials. It doesn't weigh your heart or strip your clothes or make you ford a river of venom. It goes west. Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth. Mag Mell, the plain of delight. Tir Taingir, the land of promise. The Celts had many names for the paradise that lay beyond the western sea, beyond the last shore of Ireland, beyond the horizon, in the direction of the setting sun. It was reached by boat, and unlike almost every other afterlife in any tradition, it was not reserved for the dead. The living could go there. Stories of mortals invited by fairy women to sail west and find the other world fill Irish mythology. Bran Mac Feeble sails there and spends what feels like a year returns to Ireland to find centuries have passed and no one remembers him. Oisin of the Fianna is carried there by Neame returns, centuries later, falls from his horse, ages 300 years in an instant, and dies in the arms of St. Patrick. The Celtic otherworld is not distant and unreachable. It is adjacent, a membrane away, on the other side of mist, on the other side of a certain hill, through a fairy mound on the right night. And it is not a place you earn by dying well. It is a place you are invited to by beauty, by music, by love, by the attention of beings who found something worth preserving in you. This is the most human afterlife in any tradition, not judged, not weighed, not processed, chosen, desired, called. The Celtic dead in the older traditions before Christianity arrived didn't go to a separate world at all. They cycled. They were reborn. The Tuatha De Danann retreated into the fairy mounds and became the immortal beings of the other world. The dead were ancestors who watched over the living from just the other side of the hill. Every ancient Irish festival of Samhain, now Halloween, was a night when that membrane thinned, when the dead were close enough to speak to, not frightening, not to the Celts. Familiar. 3 more traditions, each with something important to add. Rome. The Romans largely inherited their afterlife from the Greeks, the same underworld, the same Charon, the same fields of judgment, but they added one element that became enormously influential. The Manes, the spirits of the dead, were not just passive shades wandering the underworld. They were divine. They were honored as minor gods. Every Roman family had an obligation to feed and remember their ancestors. On certain days, the Parentalia in February, the Lemuria in May, the dead returned and had to be placated with offerings, with silence, with rituals performed exactly correctly. The Romans were the first civilization to fully, formally, legally institutionalize the care of the dead as a civic obligation. Neglecting your ancestors was not just impious. In Roman law, it was a civil matter. The Slavs. Ancient Slavic afterlife belief centered on Nav, the world of the dead, one of 3 realms alongside Prav, the divine realm, and Yav, the living world. The dead in Nav were called Navki restless, sometimes dangerous, especially those who had died before their time or without proper burial. The Slavic dead were hungry. They needed to be fed. Their descendants left food offerings at graves. On Deity Ancestor Days observed across Slavic cultures, families literally set extra places at the table and left food on the doorstep. The veil between the worlds was thin, not just on sacred days, but whenever someone died young, violently, or far from home. Such deaths produced restless dead forerunners of the vampire and the ghost in Eastern European folklore. Persia. We've covered Zoroastrianism's end of the world, but its individual afterlife deserves a moment here. The Chinvat Bridge, the bridge of the requiter. Every soul, upon death, must cross it. For the righteous, the bridge widens to the width of a great road. For the wicked, it narrows to a razor's edge. A figure meets the soul on the bridge, a young woman of extraordinary beauty for the righteous. She is the personification of their own good deeds, made visible, or an old, hideous woman for the wicked, their evil deeds, made flesh. And she leads them either up to the house of song, the Zoroastrian paradise, or she accompanies them as they fall from the narrowing bridge into the dark below. You are not judged by a stranger. You are judged by yourself, by what you actually did, standing before you in the only form it can take. 14 traditions, wildly different maps. And yet, Pattern 1. The crossing. Almost every afterlife in every tradition requires a crossing. A river, a bridge, a sea, a gate, a mountain pass. The Styx, the Sanzu, the Chinvat Bridge, the 9 levels of Mictlan, Charon's ferry, the gates of Irkalla. Why a crossing? Why not an instant transition? Because the human mind cannot accept that death is instantaneous. The crossing is a liminal space, a between place, that allows the psyche to process the transition. You cannot be alive and then immediately dead. You need a journey, even if it's brief, even if it's brutal. The crossing is the mind's way of saying, something is happening here. This is real. Pay attention. Pattern 2. The stripping. The gates of Irkalla strip Inanna of her crown, her jewels, her power. Datsueba strips the Japanese dead of their clothes. The Aztec dead shed their earthly identity over 4 years of the Mictlan journey. Even in Elysium, drinking from the Lethe strips the soul of its memories before rebirth. Every tradition, in some form, says you cannot bring anything with you. Not your wealth, not your titles, not your carefully constructed identity, not even your memories. What you are without all of that, that is the real question. Pattern 3. Memory as survival. Here is the pattern that surprised me most when I started researching this video. In traditions across every continent, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Roman, Slavic, Japanese, Aztec, Celtic, the condition of the dead is directly affected by whether the living remember them. The Atemu that wandered hungry without offerings, the Aztec soul that couldn't cross without the dog and the correct paper banners, the Roman manes who returned angry if the parentalia rites were neglected, the Slavic Navki, restless because they were forgotten. The dead need the living. Not in a supernatural sense, necessarily, but in the most human sense possible. We live on in the people who remember us. The moment the last person who knew your name is dead, something of you dies too. Every culture that ever lived knew this intuitively and encoded it into their theology before they had words for what they were doing. Pattern 4. The judgment. Most traditions, not all, but most include some form of assessment after death. The weighing of the heart, the 3 judges of Hades, Emma O's mirrors, the Chinvat Bridge. The content of the judgment varies wildly. In Egypt, truth and righteousness. In Greece, behavior and divine favor. In Persia, the balance of good and evil deeds. In Japan, the weight of the clothes. But the structure is the same. Your life will be reviewed, with complete accuracy, by something that cannot be bribed or deceived. This is one of the most persistent ideas in human theology, and one of the most psychologically necessary, because the living world is deeply, obviously, unjust. The cruel prosper, the kind suffer. Power protects the guilty and destroys the innocent. The judgment after death is the universe's guarantee that the accounting will happen, that the ledger will eventually be closed correctly. Every civilization needed to believe this, because the alternative that the injustice of the living world simply continues, unremarked and uncorrected, forever, was unbearable. Pattern 5. Something is preserved. Even in the bleakest afterlife visions, the house of dust and darkness, the gray asphodel meadows, the cold of Niflheim, something survives. Not comfort, not joy, not your achievements or your status. But you, diminished perhaps, unrecognizable perhaps, but still, somehow, you, the desperate insistence on survival on some form of continuation, is one of the most universal features of human thought. No culture we have ever discovered has been entirely comfortable with the idea that death is simply the end. Why? The coldly rational answer: because the mind that would be comfortable with its own annihilation would not be motivated to survive, and therefore would not evolve. The warmer answer: Because every human being has experienced moments in love, in beauty, in connection, in meaning that felt too significant to simply stop, too real to be merely temporary. The afterlife may be, above all else, a response to that feeling, the feeling that this cannot be all there is. 14 civilizations. Some of them never met each other, never shared a language, never heard each other's stories. And every single one looked at death, at the irreversible, incomprehensible fact of death, and said, there is somewhere after this. Not the same somewhere, not the same road to get there, not the same judge waiting at the end, but somewhere. The Egyptians built it with extraordinary specificity because they were a civilization of order and precision, and order required a map. The Greeks built it as a mirror of their living world because they were honest about the fact that status and heroism don't disappear when you die, not really. The Mesopotamians built it bleakly because they were a civilization that had watched everything they built be washed away by floods, and they had stopped expecting the universe to be generous. The Norse built it with cold beauty because they lived in a world that killed you in 100 ways before you were 40, and they had decided that dignity required looking at that directly. The Japanese built it with exquisite precision because they were a culture that believed the details of how you did something were as important as the thing itself. The Celts built it just over the water, just past the mist, because they were a people who believed magic was adjacent to the ordinary world, one breath away, not 1,000 miles. And the Aztecs built it with a ruthless practicality that cuts through all the poetry and asks the question that embarrasses every other tradition. What does the universe actually need from you? None of these answers is provably correct. All of them are profoundly, recognizably human. They are maps drawn by people who are afraid of the dark and who refused to stop drawing anyway. Here's what you walked away with today. The Egyptian afterlife was the most detailed and procedure-heavy a bureaucracy of the soul, requiring maps, passwords, and servant figurines. The Greek afterlife was geography, 5 rivers, 3 zones, 3 judges, and a ferry that required exact payment. Mesopotamia offered the bleakest version, dust and darkness for all, survival dependent on the memory of the living. The Norse divided the dead by manner of death, not morality, with Valhalla for the battle slain and Hel for everyone else. Japan gave us the stripping of the soul on the riverbank and the mirrors that show everything. The Aztecs said it didn't matter how you lived, it mattered how you died. The Celts said paradise was west, it was beautiful, and you might be invited there while still alive. And almost every culture agreed, crossing something, losing something, and being remembered, these are the 3 universals of dying. Subscribe if you want to know. And the question for the comments, which afterlife from any tradition in this video would you most want, and which would terrify you most? I read every single one. See you on the other side.